Hi, everyone. Thank you for waiting. And this is the Cinema Department Visiting Film Video Artist Speaker Series. And this is hosted by the Cinema Department at Binghamton University. And my name is Tomonari Nishikawa, Chair of the Cinema Department. And today we are very excited to present another event about our Professor Emeritus, Ralph Hocking, with special guest speakers. I would like to mention that we are recording this Zoom session, but we are going to stop recording before the Q&A session. First, I would like to show you the schedule of the Visiting Film Video Artist Speaker Series in the spring. And I'm going to put the link in the chat window. So next event is going to be in-person event in Lecture Hall 6 at Binghamton University, and we are going to have Cecilia Condit in attendance. So if you are around and if you are available, please join us. And last Thursday, we had an event about works by Ralph Hocking, and those who have missed the event last week, please take a look at the online program, which is still available, and I'm going to put a link in the chat window. And the link will be available until Monday, March 6th. And you can also find a link via the Cinema Department event website, which I put in the chat window too. And also, before introducing tonight's guest speakers, I would like to share exciting news with you. The Cinema Department, we are going to start a new Master of Fine Arts program this coming fall. And this is a 2-year program, and we are now accepting applications. So if you know someone who might be interested in our program, please spread the word. And I'm going to put the link in the chat window. And also, I would like to mention that now we do have this new page, the Giving to Cinema page, and I just put in the chat window. If you would consider a donation to the Cinema Department, please use a link. And your donation would be help us organize events like this, but also purchase equipment and the tools for our students. Thank you. So then now I would like to give a brief introduction about Ralph Hocking and today's guest speakers. But first, I would like to thank the Experimental Television Center for helping us organize this event. I also would like to thank Ralph Hocking and Sherry Miller Hocking for all their time, support, and contribution to this event. Thank you. Ralph Hocking has spent his life making and teaching art. He began his teaching career at Binghamton University in 1968 and served as professor of video and computer arts and the chair of the cinema department, and retired in 1998. He has been a leader in the field of electronic media art since the 1960s. In 1972, he established the independent nonprofit organization, the Experimental Television Center, with a residency and research programs for artists, equipment access, and training programs for the community, and regional and national exhibition programs. He has served as a consultant, advisor, and panelist with such organizations as the New York State Council on the Arts, the University-wide Arts Committee, the Society for Photographic Education, and many museums and galleries. His personal creative work has been exhibited widely throughout the country and in Europe, and is distributed by Video Data Bank in Chicago. He was the creative director for a 5 DVD set, the Experimental Television Center, 1969 to 2009, with a 130-page catalog in distribution with Electronic Arts Intermix and Video Data Bank. Ralph Hocking is not joining us today, but we do have 2 guest speakers who will talk about Ralph's work. Per Bode and Kathy Hai. Per Bode is a video artist in a career spanning over 4 decades, has created an extensive body of work that investigates electronic media events, active participation system, and culture. A graduate of Binghamton University's cinema department, Per Bode studied with Larry Guttheim, Nicholas Ray, Ken Jacobs, and Peter Kubelka, and later with Woody and Steiner Vasulka, Paul Sharitz, Tony Conrad, and Hollis Frampton at SUNY Buffalo's Media Studies program. Per Bode worked at the Experimental Television Center, where he made his early works while assisting and collaborating with the video artist and engineer David Jones. His work has been widely exhibited nationally and internationally at venues including Museum of Modern Art, Anthology Film Archives, the Whitney Biennial, the European Media Arts Festival in Germany, among many others. He's a key figure of the Owego and Alfred School of Video Art, and he headed the Video Arts program at the School of Art and Design in the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University, where he co-founded the Institute for Electronic Arts. Per Bode is Emeritus Professor of Art at Alfred University, and he is joining us from Hornell, New York. And our another guest today is Kathy Hai. And Kathy Hai is a graduate of the master's program at SUNY Buffalo's Center for Media Studies, where her mentors were the pioneering film video artists Steiner Vasulka and Tony Conrad. Her co-edited book, The Emergence of Video Processing Tools, Television Becoming Unglued, with Sherry Miller Hocking of the Experimental Television Center and Mona Jimenez of the Moving Image Preservation Program at New York University, was published in 2014. The book presents stories of the development of early video tools and systems designed and built by artists and technologists during the late 1960s and 70s, and how that history of collaborations among inventors, designers, and artists has affected contemporary tool makers. Today, Kathy Hai is an interdisciplinary artist who collaborates with scientists, technologists, and activists. She is a professor of arts at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and is the director of the BioArt and Technology Laboratory in RPI's Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies. She is committed to queer, feminist approaches to reshaping media technologies, learning by doing, and collaborative action. Among many honors, she is a recipient of fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. And now I am showing the slides with the list of works that we are going to share with you during the presentation, and we will ask you to watch some of the excerpts of these works. And I'm going to put a link when we ask you to watch excerpt. And these links I'm going to share with you will be available until Monday, March 6th. I also would like to mention that there would be a Q&A session after the presentation. And now please join me and welcome Per Bode and Kathy Hai.
Thank you, Tomo, for those wonderful introductions, and thanks to everybody for coming tonight. Can you all hear me? I hope so. I'm honored to be speaking about Ralph Hocking's work tonight with Per Bode. Tonight, Per and I will give you a sense of Ralph's artwork, often made in collaboration with Sherry Miller Hocking. We will look at a sampling of works and also hear excerpts of Ralph and Sherry's own writings and thoughts about their processes and discoveries along the way. Ralph is no longer participating in public presentations, and so Per and I are the designated representatives. Those of us who know Ralph Hocking hold him very high in esteem. His contributions and accomplishments are historically significant. He is a hero to many of us, and especially to me. I'll start off tonight by reading an early piece of writing by Ralph from 1972 to give you a sense of him. This piece is entitled Sponsors Sell, and it's pictured here in the image. Sponsors sell, networks develop what sponsors want. People buy, so sponsors sell. Networks develop because sponsors sell. People watch because sponsors sell, and networks develop. Nielsen says people watch because sponsors sell, and people buy and watch network developments. Actually, people watch television, not sponsors or networks, and the sponsors would still sell regardless of what networks develop. Networks and sponsors do have a responsibility, but people will watch anything. And this piece was written in, as I said, in 1972 as a kind of maybe a precursor to other works like, for example, Richard Serra's Television Delivers People, which was done in 1973. Next slide, please. Oh, Per, you must introduce yourself.
No, that's okay. Hi, everyone. Of course, I'm also just thrilled to be partaking in this, and thank you. Wonderful. I have a few thoughts in way of an introduction. I'm just going to read this for you. We are seeing a resurgence and a revisiting of early experimental television, sound, and cinema work by a new next generation. Ralph Hocking's work is participating in that renewed interest. What is the work? Ralph Hocking's project is, in a broad stroke, the project of art, education, and technology. Ralph's video work has focused on real-time dialogues and interactions within electronically created and controlled signals. We see many cases of video recordings of multiple channels of monitoring and observing. We see an observer observing another observer in the space of the electronic processes. We see the observed observer observing the sound and image interaction space on the image and sound monitors and then responding, a dialogue. These works are rich electronic observations, voyeurisms, feedbacks, and actions. The sculptor, photographer, video, media maker, with up to 6 simultaneous live cameras looking and dialoguing across numerous systems of understanding. Dialoguing with Sherry Miller, his collaborator, observer and performer. Photography, film, video, computer, mediations, image, sound, signals, and bodies. These are another set of terms for understanding. These pieces, reclaiming the visual and sound space from the laws of the textual terrain and the terms of argument. His is a personal need to delete the text, substituting the eye, the hand, the mind complex, a curiosity, a desire, and a thinking. Ralph Hocking chose to explore and make art using television. First there is television, then there is experimental television, the venom's antidote. Right.
Thank you, Per. So this is a slide to cue you all to go to look at this excerpt from Transparent Body by Ralph Hocking made in 1973. If you would copy the link from the chat window, as Tomo suggested earlier tonight, and go to that video, please watch section 3 minutes, 30 seconds to 6 minutes, 30 seconds. And we'll come back and reconvene here in about 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes or so. Thank you. Tomo, if you could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to read some of an email that Sherry Miller Hocking shared with me, some writing of hers, describing the process of working with Ralph on the making of these videos. She says, in making the work, I participated with the parameters Ralph established with the system. Before he made a recording, I knew the patch or electronic premises of the video electronic environment and was free to act, react, and interact with those. In almost every situation, I could see a monitor output of the system and see what Ralph was doing. In some situations, Ralph set up the environment with a preset patches and then set the system free to play out those parameters. Sometimes my physical actions affected the imagery. A very simple example would be feedback. If a motion changed the lighting, then the image might be altered. Sometimes Ralph would interact in real time with the system, but in all cases, I could see the live imagery. Reactive and proactive converse. Observer becomes observed. We lived with these systems. Ralph often spoke about letting the system run through the day, observing the workings of the machine. And here's a quote from Ralph from a catalog entry that he made for the Grid exhibition. He says, I was trained in the making and study of pottery and sculpture. The Han Dynasty in China and the medieval period of England produced what I wanted to do with poetry. Rodin did the same for sculpture. I turned to photography partly because of a lack of patience in the art-making process, and partly because the art was stackable in a small amount of space. Video and computers were the logical next step because they're photography dealing with time and the processes are more immediate than film. My early work began with single-channel images processed with a keyer and limited special effects generator. When I acquired a Bode synthesizer in 1972, I began exploring multiple camera images based on mixing, image reversal, horizontal and vertical rate switching, and color. The next development was voltage control of the image processing. Most of this work was done in collaboration with Charlene Miller. I would set up a situation and she would react to her image, and I would keep changing the relationships she saw. The main body of the work was concerned with simultaneous views of Sherry in movement or in a single pose. Usually we would use between 4 and 6 cameras. Most often the cameras were black and white, and the signals were processed through a synthesizer. I often used square waves to control the keyer clip input, allowing for the offsetting of portions of the images. Most of the work during 1971 to 1978 was not edited. We would do several versions of the same setup, repeat ourselves, rather than try to edit on the decks available to us at the time. Time was not rearranged. Next slide, please.
This is text from Sherry about the rollover machine. Photographic apparatus. This was shown at the Everson Museum of Art, Information, Works, and Activities exhibition in 1976. Next slide, please. The mechanism is a repurposed device used by cable television companies in the 1970s to make public service community announcements. Each of the 12 rotating cylinders had 10 slots, each holding a 4x6 card, which held typed PSAs for church bank sale or a Rotary Club meeting. Each rotating device, sorry, I lost my place here. Top. Each rotating device was placed in front of the camera so that the camera framed one message. As the device rotated, each of the 10 cards was presented to the video camera one at a time for a short period. Before the device rotated to the next card, the announcements were automated in this way. Ralph used the mechanism to display 12 videotapes. He took 10 black and white photos in sequence from a videotape and then hand-colored each. Each photo was then mounted in a rotating device. Each rotating device displayed one sequential image from one tape. The entire gang of devices displayed 12 videotapes. The video is captured as discrete stills, which were then reanimated mechanically to recreate the video. Moving images became still photographically. The still images moved to recreate video mechanically. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide.
So thank you, Per. Next, we're going to go to an excerpt from Ovals by Ralph, created in 1978. So again, the link is in the chat. If you can click on that and go to the video. Please watch the excerpt from number 13 minutes in to 16 minutes in, and we'll see you back here in about 3.5 minutes. Thanks. Next slide, please. So welcome back. And now I'm going to read to you from the DVD excerpt, DVD liner notes that Ralph wrote about ovals. We think that these writings of Ralph and Sherry's are just so incredibly descriptive of everything that this is why we're reading so much of their work and giving their voice to you. So Ralph says about ovals, ovals is a kind of compilation of short ideas that seem to have a common ground. One of the standing jokes on Computer Sunday, booze, weed, food, and programming I cooked, was the inability to make a circle with our oscillators. It had to do with the height and width ratio of the television roster, the screen lines. I came to prefer the oval shape since it was female. Many of these segments were manufactured by using a bank of David Jones, Richard Brewster's built oscillators, mixers, amplifiers, patch matrix, and a Pike Abe colorizer. Oscillators are sort of the base material of the TV video experience. You can draw with them and govern their behavior by controlling them each other through a process called voltage control. Video came to this by the example of audio synthesis, Moog, ARP, Synthi, and so on. Instead of hearing the oscillators, you see them, or both, depending upon the frequency of the oscillator. Shapes are governed by the mix of adjustable sine, square, and triangle waveforms. If you allow the technology of TV video to be simplified, then much can be understood about controlling the raw material. There really isn't much to control. How much and how often are the basis for most of it. Amplitude and frequency. Complexity develops within the control and the character of the machine. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to send you away one more time to see Slow Scan by Ralph, made in 1980. Again, the link is in the chat. And please watch from the beginning to 3:10, and I'll join you back here just in about a little more than 3 minutes. Thank you. Next slide, please. Welcome back, everyone. Again, I'm going to read from the liner notes of Ralph's DVD for slow scan. Slow scan was made in 1980, and slow scan was made using a forerunner of the fax machine, Ralph says. Industrial machines were often a point of departure. Industrial surplus was our basic way of acquiring tools to work with, since new stuff was way beyond our financial ability. It was able to transmit low-resolution images over telephone lines by having a video camera view a document or photograph and slowly record onto an erasable disk whatever it was pointed at. It took several seconds for the image to be completed. If the camera or the image moved during that time, then smearing would take place. A frozen still could be played with creating a kind of animation. I set up a situation and Sherry reacted to what she saw in a live monitor. No edits, no audio. Next slide, please.
This is text from Sherry. Ralph's work, unmediated natural environment, both visual and sound, non-text or language, body time, passing respect for random chance occurrences within and outside the operations of a system. Early photos, 1960s through 70s, film developed and printed in personal studio darkrooms. Ralph was first person to offer a photography course at Binghamton University. He looked for darkroom space on campus and also offered students to use the community darkroom facilities at ETC in downtown Binghamton. Then in 1983, prints, not photographs. Image was grabbed from a pre-recorded videotape, image then printed with black and white dot matrix printer using an Amiga and a program written by David Jones' fine print program. Next slide, please. Fine print, the program, using an Amiga computer, allowed multiple shade of gray printing on normal dot matrix printers, using a dot matrix printer and used dot matrix ribbons. Fine print generates highly detailed gray level graphics dumps of Amiga images by overstriking each dot as many as 15 times. The overstrike requires the use of the worn ribbons, as fresh ribbons would produce a solid black image. Because many 9-pin dot matrix printers have resolutions as high as 240 dots per inch, it is possible to make fully detailed printouts using a low-cost impact printer. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is a text poem that Ralph wrote called Walk, Run. Television, experimental, television video, video art, video, synthesis, video, processing image, processing electronic image, processing visual, signal structuring electronic, visual design, computer graphics, computer-controlled image processing, computer-generated imagery, analog digital image generation. I know what it is. but I don't know what to call it. I'm tired of saying it's like using electronics to paint with. To hell with what it's like. How do I say what it is? Casting cable, broad, not my concern. I don't care about showing my work on casting. My work doesn't relate to the social condition. It relates to video's condition. We need a video game where nothing gets shot, killed, or eaten. Video is made from stuff like pottery. The stuff is just more difficult to feel. Walk, run is about going back, zeroing, pots, switching to off, using one camera, now it's color, and thinking about time. Sherry and I are a constant. Next slide. This is a image from an installation that Ralph made for an exhibit called Grid, which was curated by Peter Chamberlain at the Arnott Museum in Elmira in 1986. And this piece is, I think, really quite significant because it's an example of the tools and equipment that Ralph and Sherry were working with in their studio and actually bringing it out into an exhibition space, into a gallery museum space as an installation. Sherry wrote a little text here that I will read to you. Sherry wrote, "It was part of Ralph's studio system, the one he used all the time. In an overall perspective, it used inputs, camera, audio signals, controllers, processors, such as keyers, colorizer, and outputs, as well as signal monitoring equipment, waveform monitor, etc., to ensure signal standards. Inputs, processors, outputs, and monitoring." From the Grid catalog, Ralph writes, "I live in my senses, especially the eyes, and then the ears and touch. Video gives me a connection between these parts and thinking. That's enough." Next slide. Next slide.
So one more time, you're going to step out and see this video, Dig It, by Ralph Hocking, performative computer work from 1989. The link is in the chat. And please know that the work is about 1.5 minutes, but it will take a little bit of time to boot up. So please watch the entire video. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to read to you from a statement that Ralph wrote about 3 different works, Jump, Dig It, and Running. It was part of a catalog from the exhibition called Motion, the 58th exhibition of Central New York artists. It was curated by John Connect and exhibited in 1999 to 2000 from October to January. And so this was Ralph's artist statement for those 3 videos, including Dig It. Video gathering images are affected by using methodology based in digital processing. Some imagery is changed by convolving, bit swapping, and field manipulation. 3-dimensional illusions are the result of the latter. My interest is to create edges or sets of possibilities within the computer in linear and disparate ways at times that may or may not be predictable. In other words, give back to the computer control over when and how the information will be presented. The randomness of offering is often the resulting art. Surprise is necessary to invention at some level. I want to ignore the surface metaphorics offered by most commercial programming and discover the abilities of the machine. This is an extension of work begun as a result of study based in making pottery. Next slide, please. So now we're going to change a little bit to talk about the Experimental Television Center and the various studios that were evolved over the years. So first we'll address the Binghamton studio that was established in 1972. I'd like to read again a little bit of a quote from Sherry. She mentioned that Ralph considered Experimental Television Center, or ETC, to be one of his installations and sculptures. So there really is no difference between, this work and his own sculptural work. It was interactive, random elements, chance occurrences, systems designed, and then set to run. Next slide, please. Ralph's interest in this medium as a new uncharted territory with, quote, no precedent, no body of history, as he said, was extraordinary. He created the experimental television as a laboratory to, quote, support as much unconventional machinery as possible while urging the usage of whatever we had for the development of video art, unquote. So Ralph was the founder and director of ETC, and Sherry Miller Hocking, the assistant director. And ETC provided various services to the media arts community, including an artist in residency program, a sponsorship program for artist projects, a range of grant programs, a video history web database, a range of grant programs. A video history web database collecting ongoing contributions, and a variety of workshops. In Ralph's words, he created the center as a, quote, learning place and not a production house, unquote. So in other words, it was not a place where engineers provided technical services to artists as seen in broadcast television studios, but rather a place where artists and technicians worked in tandem. Ralph built the center as a model, encouraging artists to emulate it for themselves. Quote, as we develop machines, mostly through Dave Jones' efforts, for the express purpose of trying to make visual art, I tried to encourage individuals to set up their own studios, unquote. And this statement of Ralph's was one of the first pieces of advice that I remember Ralph saying to me back in the 1980s. And I think that it was really prophetic in terms of thinking through what all of this machinery would become encased in our laptops, et cetera, today. Next slide, please.
So this is one of 2 studios, 1975, 2 setups of equipment that were fairly near each other in a space that was quite a large open space. And this is what you're looking at is in the middle of the equipment, that rack that's there is the pike. There are pike abe's there, the 7 pots, horizontal black pots. To the left of that is the raster manipulation device, which was really considered part of the Pike-Abe synthesizer. And it was a black and white TV set with extra coils put on them that had oscillations running into them and deflecting the image magnetically, bending and undulating the image on the surface of the tube. And the camera actually then was needed to pick that up and to then turn it into a video signal to be mixed. This situation, you see there are two cameras, one on the bottom left, one in the middle, black and white cameras. Probably that large monitor on the left is black and white. The one above it is color. That is the signal having gone through the Pike-Abe. Also, looking at the rack again, and this is quite significant. Actually, there's the white square that's there. That's actually a pin matrix, and that was really the beginning of a whole concept of the TV Center's equipment design, which was that you could patch from any piece of equipment to any other piece of equipment by, in this case, pins that you would put in. And so you would actually create inputs, outputs. You would be programming this analog system. You didn't have to be patching and repatching the equipment. You actually did it with the pins that were there. There are also some oscillators in that, right below that. Also to the right, those two rectangular boxes with the meters, those were industrial oscillators that I believe were bought on surplus. They were very high speed. They were not voltage controllable, but they were quite remarkable what they did. And then the VTR, the video tape recorder that's sitting in front of them, that's an open reel half-inch reel-to-reel tape deck, and the tape deck itself could record hour-long tapes. What's on the machine right now is a half-hour tape, so that was used for quite a long time. That is the half-inch before we went on to three-quarter. Next slide, please. This was the other setup, and here we're looking at on that spool is an early version of Dave Jones's colorizer mixer keyer unit, and there's some oscillators that are sitting on top of that as well, which were oscillators that were voltage controllable that then could do what the oscillators on the right, those industrial oscillators, were not able to do. There's also a raster manipulation device there, again on the left, a camera pointing at that, and again the VCR on the right side for recording. There's also a powered speaker box that looks very modest, but it was actually really a wonderful little unit. Anyway, that was a separate setup from the first one that we looked at. Okay, next slide, please.
So artist video tools development. Let me just, before we launch into this, read a quote from an article that Sherry wrote for Squeaky Wheel about sort of the concepts behind ETC's tool development. Since 1971, the research and the residency programs at the center have been equal partners, providing opportunities for artists and technicians to collaboratively work towards the conceptualization and realization of new instruments. Using these new devices, artists create images previously unseen and new relationships among visual and sonic elements. The early commercially available tool set for media artists was very limited, and the center dedicated its resources to breaking through the boundaries of these devices and to creating new machines. From the early 1970s modifications of Portapak cameras to allow adjustments over gain and pedestal, to the construction of the Pike-Abe video synthesizer, the Jones buffer, and the interface of the LSI-11 computer system, the design and use by video makers of responsive and flexible tools has always been an important mission of the center. Next slide, please.
So here's a wonderful photo of Pike-Abe synthesizer 1973. This is one of 3 pike aves, I believe, that were at the center. And you see that there are 7 channels, black knobs. This was basically a 7-channel mixer that would allow you to mix 7 channels of video, as opposed to what was the tradition in the, quote, special effects SEG of A and B, mixing A and B, wiping between A and B. And I think this was very much Namjoon's insight that audio mixers are multi-channel. Why wouldn't a video mixer be multi-channel? So this is a good example of where sort of the culture and understandings that came out of music and electronic music actually had impact on the tools. And this then also had a way of distributing the colors. The switches that are on there would turn the channels on and off. So one could actually, in real time while recording, one could be switching, editing, changing the mix, on, off, on, off, on, off. One could perform it, and one could really deal with timing and sort of body energies, et cetera. It was really meant to be a performance device. The controls on the right, which color, turning the color wheel, brightness, contrast, and then the amount of color. This was, there's actually, even before this instrument was made, Kathy just read about this modifying of cameras. Cameras were modified, old black and white SEGs were modified. The whole idea of a kind of hacker culture was really, that's really been an idea for a long time, including even increasing the life of batteries, that would, how long a battery would work with a Portapack, that rather than 20 minutes, it would, could be something that could make a big difference in terms of capability. Next slide, please. So this is an early prototype of David's colorizer. He called it the Jones colorizer. It was a colorizer. It was a 4-channel colorizer. It also was a keyer. It had a key clip control, and what else? It could do additive mixing and diode mixing. Diode mixing being a really special electronic way of doing mixing that is a little bit like keying, where things really sit on top of, they're not equally mixed. It's really quite an interesting idea that he came up with. All of the inputs on that device are voltage controllable. That panel that you see below, all those round little circles, those are all mini connectors, could go in there from audio devices, from oscillations. So one could change the parameters either with one's fingers, or one could change them externally from an oscillator system or an audio synthesizer system, or the combination of the two. And I believe actually the switches turned that on and off as well, so there was a performative aspect also. It also happened to be a very high-res. David designed it at extremely high-res capabilities, because he had really learned a lot about electronics and was spending a lot of time and wanted to make something that actually was way beyond what you could even record with half-inch reel-to-reel tape. Next slide, please. This is a piece by Don MacArthur, Dr. Don MacArthur, who taught, I forget what he taught, actually, physics maybe, at Cortland, SUNY Cortland. And he designed this. SED stands for Spatial and Intensity Digitizer. And this was a device, this was an A to D and a D to A. So this was really heading into the world of digital video. In fact, was digital video. And it was in 1975. It was really a very, very early working in that mode. And I know there was a lot of excitement about it. Woody and Steinhoff Zulka were also very excited about what it was that Don was coming up with and providing to the community. Next slide. The Brewster-Jones Control Voltage Bank, that's Rich Brewster and David Jones working together, putting together, this is one of many, many different configurations of control voltage systems that they developed. Again, you see the pin matrix there so that you could go from module to module so that one oscillator could voltage control another oscillator. Again, this kind of, you could really call that an analog computer in many ways. You have your signals and it's very patchable and it's very programmable. And it's all in real time. And one could use it for generating audio, but one also was meant to be connected to David's colorizer and various other video tools so that one would actually see the results of the oscillations as video. As, for example, the ovals piece that we just saw was the mixing of oscillations to create those forms and shapes. So that really was a very interesting approach to video that was non-camera based. No camera involved at all, just oscillations. And in the case of ovals, Ralph then also using the Pike-Abe colorizer to actually make those colors, which are so not, again, I'm talking about ovals, so not the colors that most people think of when they think of the Pike-Abe colorizer, because Namjoon liked his colorizer images really hot, very, very hot, spicy hot. And Ralph really just had a very different palette and a very different interest in terms of what color meant to him in that environment. Next slide, please.
So the Experimental Television Center moved from Binghamton to Owego in 1979. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of the site. What was interesting was that they took over the third floor of the building at 180 Front Street in Owego. And this is a picture from the back of the building, looking over the Susquehanna River and into the third floor, and the kind of glow that literally came from the machines and the monitors that were playing in the studio as artists would work all night. And it was a really incredible space. And so we'll show you some pictures of it. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this now is the studio with some of the same equipment that we saw. This is 1983, but there's more equipment as you see. On the left side is the Z2 computer system and a control interface system box that's sitting there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The raster manipulation device is above that, and there's a scope, an oscilloscope there. The monitor that's on the stand is the final display monitor. There's a waveform monitor below it. An SEG that's sitting there. And if we now go to the next set of equipment that's there, instead of a pin matrix, we actually have these slider matrix panel that is these slides. And there was another name for it. I can't think of what it is right now. But it was the same function. You could go from any video device to any other video device. You didn't have to patch the equipment. So you could move very quickly. You could really, what if I tried this? What if that's interesting. I'd like to actually have this image on top. I'd like to make the colorization happen later, or whatever. You could really think through the process. And an important part of that thinking really in programming was right at that place of the matrix. Below it is a Pike-Abe, a little different looking Pike-Abe. And then below that is a collection, is the output amplifier, and there's a video switcher that David built, 1 in 4 out, 4 in 1 out switcher. I believe maybe there's a key or two. Below that is some more oscillators, voltage control oscillators, since that was really a significant way of generating imagery and controlling imagery that it ended up happening in a number of different ways. The pile of monitors or pile of equipment to the right, there's the Jones colorizer controller. You can see it sitting there. I don't remember actually what the next 2 boxes are. There's those little monitors, preview monitors, and some camera adapters there. To the right is Don MacArthur's SED, Spatial and Intensity Digitizer. Below that is a very elaborate audio synthesizer that Rich Brewster put together based on, I'm fishing for a name right now. Bernie Hutchins had a newsletter that he put out every month. He was at Cornell in Ithaca, and was about how to make these modules. And this was very much the Surge module, Surge kind of thinking around things, the Surge audio synthesizer, very modular audio synthesizer that functioned beautifully together with the rest of the equipment. To the right, the silver box with the black knob in the middle was actually a project I was working on with David Jones, and that's the prototype for the video frame buffer that ended up being in the studio. And David said to me when he saw one of my tapes with drifting images, he said, you could do that really simply with digital. I said, oh, really? Little did I know what I was in for, but we hand built it. We hand built that, or I hand built a lot of that under David's guidance. Great experience. Next slide. That's another shot of the studio. There you can see the table with the Sony Trinitron monitor and the computer. There's the dot matrix printer. So that artists could actually use fine print and could make prints as well. To the left, actually, there's that camera that's pointing to the right, that Portapack camera. You can see it's got extra knobs on the side. That's one of those modified cameras. Next slide. This is a close-up from that last shot. And this is quite significant for a number of reasons. It's 1983, and David Jones, together with Paul Davis, have really put together an image processing system based around the Z2 computer, which was kind of the hacker computer. It was one that, for many reasons, people were using, and it was reasonably priced. Those were 8-inch floppy disks that were being used. And that interface box was called the 7 plus DA. I can't remember now. But it was analog and digital inputs. So you had knobs, and you also had jacks. So you could put sound into the box. You could control parameters with the knobs, and you had switches, and you had digital out. So this was truly a general purpose interface box to be able to get out of the computer. And this partially came from these Sunday afternoon events at Ralph and Sherry's, and arguments that I actually kind of remember, conversations between Paul Davis and David Jones, and Paul telling Ralph that he needed to learn mathematics to do computer art. And Ralph told him that made no sense to him at all, that he had trained fingers and that they had to figure out a way of making fingers be able to control the computer. Much like Nam June Paik said, the Paik Abe was about making television with your fingers, not your mouth. And so this was one version, and a very significant one, for controlling the computer with knobs and switches, input and output. Next slide. And here's a larger version of this general purpose interface. So this was 16 channels of this. And again, and this one's even earlier. This is 82, 83. It's really early for this kind of computer process going on. And, artists were thrilled to be able to actually be learning about this, because as Ralph had said, the studio was not a production studio, it was a learning environment. And we learned a lot from the engineers, and then we were handed over the equipment. Really quite remarkable. Next slide. This is an image of David Jones's frame buffer that he developed in '86. So this is the buffer that you saw, the prototype that David and I were working on. Boards, that was hand wired. Then the boards were printed, and I think actually Matt Schlanger, together with David, put together, it's the red box on the top left, that is the frame buffer that was in the studio for many years. there also is a newer version, larger version of the matrix switch. And there you see the lettering on the top and on the right side. You could go from any device to any other device in the studio. Interestingly, in the below the white box in the middle is a Fairlight video synthesizer, which was an early digital video synthesizer that came from Australia. The box below is, we saw, I think, that one or a version of it in the earlier photo, output amplifier and switcher and keyers. The keyers were just remarkable that David had made. They were A, B, and external keys, so you could actually have an input that you wouldn't actually see the gray levels of the image or oscillating image, whatever it was, would define where A and B were happening, really like a keyer I had never seen before. To the white box on the bottom right, that's the David Jones colorizer that then was the one with the printed boards, because there was a moment when it was clear that it was important to actually print the boards, not just have hand-wired boards. And partly there were a group of artists. There were a number of us. We had the Tuesday afternoon building club, and David guided us. I worked on the buffer. Matt Schlanger was there. Neil Zussman was there. Barbara Buckner was there. Mimi Martin. And we, over a good 6 months, or maybe more than that, might have been 9 months, we would get together once a week, and we would build prototypes that then were turned into printed boards. And the idea was to actually then make it so that the studio would be more stable, but then also that a larger artist community could actually have these tools. And we were all very excited about that possibility as well. Okay, next slide.
So this is an image of the video library that was on the same, right across the hall from the system that Per was just describing. You were looking at pictures of. And artists who came to the residency program, through the program, were asked to leave or send later a videotape of the work they had done while they were at the in Amigo at ETC. And so this became a kind of really interesting resource for other artists who would come through, who would then use this library to some, sort of educational purposes of kind of looking at all the other artists' works and to inspire them. Next slide, please. This is also a workshop that was held at ETC in Owego. This was one that was organized by Pam Hawking, and it was a 2-week international student residency workshop. Andrew Deutsch is on the left speaking to the group of students. And this is just one of many workshops that took place in the space. In this picture, actually half of the students are from Norway. So you can see the kind of international reach that the ETC had. Next slide, please. And then we finally have a panoramic view of the system, which is really gives you a really good sense of how extensive all of these tools were that Per was just describing in detail. But also, if you look on the far left of this image, you can see 2 old Macintosh computers, and then 2 machines down from that. The silver one is a Sandine image processor, which is a really wonderful piece of equipment that was acquired by ETC. And then many of the other instruments that Per just described. And it was referred to as a system. And Sherry wrote in a Squeaky Wheel article, the system includes hand-built artist design instruments such as the Jones colorizer and Sandine image processor, as well as old and new digital technologies. So it's very interesting to see this mix of analog and digital and the kind of crossover between them going back and forth early on to later. Next slide, please.
If you can make your move for this, this is, let me just say a little bit what it is. This is a short excerpt from a video document that Stena Vizolko recorded of an exhibition at Ars Electronica called Eigenwelt or Apparatewelt, Pioneers of Electronic Art. I believe this is 2 or 3 minutes long. Does it say what it is?
I think it is 2 minutes. You're right. Yeah.
And we'll see you when you come back. Thank you.
What are those guys congratulating themselves on? The show in Linz, Austria for Ars Electronica called Die Eigenwälder Apparatenwelt. It started with a call in November from Peter Weibel. Would we curate such a show? And once we said yes, we started accumulating our staff and getting on the task. First came the site visits. And the next day on to Binghamton, New York, to Sherry and Ralph Hocking.
Okay, wonderful. So,
that's Abe's. That's copies of originals from Abe.
would you be able to, let me see if I can show you some dates. Just gonna do it.
Come to think of it in retrospect, this is how we were hoping the show would look like, or this is sort of in our mind's eyes we envisioned the show in Linz to be.
Next slide. I believe we have an image. Yeah. This, just very quickly, this exhibition was a very major exhibition of electronic art tools and videotapes and sound. Ralph built and organized the building of interfaces so the public seeing the show could actually control the equipment. And then there was a barcode catalog structure, exhibition presentation structure, and you could, by swiping the barcode, you could see video works, you could see works made by those instruments, and you could see designers' interviews. So this is really an advanced exhibition concept, really one to pay attention to. Peter Weibel was the director of Ars Electronica at that time, and he has written that in the 50s and 60s, we saw the development of electronic music studios in the US and internationally. And in the 60s and later, we saw the development of electronic television studios nationally and internationally. So this whole phenomena of studios, electronic studios, first existed in music and then it existed in television. Next slide.
So now we're going to go to Ralph and Sherry's home studio. And next slide, please. So another quote from Ralph. He said that video and computer tools can be used to generate and record images and sound. I welcome the limitations of these tools, defined two-dimensional space governed by laws perpetuated by the profit motive, much more understandable than the problems I have with charcoal and paper. Remote control, a concept dear to a child of the 30s, knobs to twist, switches to flip, images being banged out by little hammers onto paper, and electrons spraying a magical pattern of light before my eyes. The stuff dreams are made of. Next slide.
So we'll go through a few stills from that videotape. Next slide. Next slide. There's the dot matrix printer that Ralph made the digital prints on that we saw. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So this studio space, this is the space that was also the research space that Paul and David came and developed a number of the tools in. So it functioned in many ways, in what happened in this studio then made its way down to Binghamton and Owego in the studios there. Next slide.
So this is another kind of desk shot and work area in their studio. I just want to point out a couple of the things on the wall behind the tables. On the right is a print of Donald Judd, which was a gift to Ralph from Judd and his assistant, Jamie Deering. And to the left of that, right on the bottom, is a charcoal drawing of Richard Serra, which was inscribed to Ralph with thanks for loaning Joan Jonas equipment, a projector to be specific. Next slide, please. So these are just kind of eclectic shots of their space so that you can see the kind of work areas that were set up. Next slides, please. And the kinds of collection of other devices that were in the space with the equipment that they were building. So you can see here old, photographic equipment. Next slide, please. Telescopes. Next slide, please. And even taxidermy. Their house and their curiosity is just incredible, because Ralph has always been interested in how things work. And so you have old medical instruments, really old electronic medical instruments, old video instruments, everything you can imagine, including photography. And it just shows this kind of, as I said, this endless curiosity on both Ralph and Sherry's part to just keep, looking at these things and sort of thinking about how things are made, how we can make them. Next slide, please.
This term, loose affiliations, this is something that came up in an interview with Ralph, where he asked what the ETC was. Was it a collaboration? Was it a co-op? Was it a commune? What were you? And his response was, we were a group of loose affiliations. There's a long list of artists there were several hundred artists that came through the TV Center. But early on, some of the artists were Jackson McClough, Shigeko Kaboto, Namjoon Paik, Stena, Woody Vazolka, Aldo Tombolini, Doris Chase, Richard Kostelanetz, Walter Wright, Barbara Buckner, Shalom Gorowitz, and many, many others. Tool developers, again, this is this thing about the affiliations. Shuya Abe, Ken Dominic, Bob Diamond, Walter Wright, David Jones, Paul Davis, Richard Brewster, Matt Schlanger, Hank Rudolph, and others. Next slide. This is a text that Namjoon Paik wrote for Ralph. There was a version of this that was in Video 81 magazine, and on the left side, this is not in this version of it, were some still images from the video called Suite 212, which was a collaboration between Namjoon Paik and Shigeko. And I just want to read, I'll just read just a short bit on the right here. If there is a Lao Tzu in video, he must be Ralph Hocking. He lives like a hermit in Owego County or Appalachian County, maybe in Pennsylvania or maybe in upstate New York, so obscure that nobody knows. As he is as big as a tiger, but his heart is as soft as a sheep. His English as scarce as Chinese. Without fanfare, a gentleman unknown in the countryside, he made several computer tapes, which is still largely unknown, or maybe will be unknown for the next 1,000 years. But after 1,000 years, there will be a few guys or girls, maybe in Ulaanbaatar or in Timor Island or in Peru, who knows, maybe in New York City, who will dust off and look carefully the statement. His problem is that his tape is almost exclusively vaginal, yet completely asexual. Even in the abstract tapes of Pixel, all one sees is one big hole, and the big valley is in Lao Tzu's sense, or a big valley in Lao Tzu's sense. Are you interested in the black hole in the sun? Yes, but the black hole in the human being is more interesting still. Namjoon Pike. P.S. All works of Hocking is made in the essential collaboration with a very smart lady, Shirley Miller. Next slide. Again, affiliations and friendships. These are just wonderful photos that I hadn't seen the one on the left. That's Sherry and Ralph and Stena Vizulka in 1973, taken no doubt by Woody Vizulka. And on the right is Ralph in Woody and Stena space in Buffalo. Again, probably Woody taking that photo. Next slide. Okay, so if you could move to this so that we see the last piece, last video called Pond Triptych.
I'll see you back in 3 minutes.
Be back in 3 minutes, right? Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Next slide, please. So this piece that you just saw, Pond Triptych, was one channel of a 3-channel piece made in 2017 by Ralph. And the Sherry wrote that the 3-channel tapes, each tape is a time-lapse recording of the pond outside of their house, actually. Sound was recorded and edited separately and is often dissonant with the imagery. For example, night sounds during the day Each tape was edited in a way that creates a structured conversation among the channels. Beautiful image of Ralph sitting, watching that work. Next slide, please. So we're just going to look at some final images here. This is a wonderful picture of Ralph in 1982 wearing his TV shirt. Next slide, please. And a wonderful picture of both Ralph and Sherry. Next slide, please. And here are the boxes of many of the archives from ETC. Next slide, please. And you can see here they're beginning to pack up equipment from ETC. And next slide, please. And so, you can see that all of this is becoming organized in their space as opposed to the studio that you saw in earlier pictures. Next slide, please. And so many of the archives in 2015 were moved to Cornell. On the left is Alana Stati and Lauren Van Hoften-Schick, interns from Cornell who were helping to catalog and archive and document the things that were going into these boxes to go to Cornell. Carolyn Tennant is on the right, a friend, scholar, media activist, and is also helping to pack up boxes. So presently the paper archives and ETC documents collection and the ETC videotape archives reside at the Rose Goldson Archive of New Media Art at Cornell University under the guidance of Tim Murray. Next slide, please. Here they're moving boxes to Cornell. Next slide, please. And then there also is a move to take equipment away, which is obviously a much bigger endeavor. Next slide, please. And today, ETC is operating under the direction of Eric Gabrieluk. So Eric is the new director, and ETC is moving to Atlanta, Georgia. So ETC closed the residency and grants program in 2011 to move into a research and focus more on history, archiving, and preservation. Eric Gabrieluk is the current ETC director, as I said, and he's pursuing archiving, preservation, and making the machines live again and be available to artists. Next slide, please. So here you can find much of the information about the ETC website. So please go there. Eric has designed a brand new website, but retaining all of the old, wonderful, data from the original website. And also Eric's done a great job adding documents and such to archive.org. So this is the link to that. And these links are in the chat as well. So please, link on them, hit them so you can go back to these. And also, as I said, the paper documents and videotapes are at the Rose Goldson Archive, excuse me, at Cornell. And so here are their websites, so you can visit them as well. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy and the pair.